We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. It is the 9th of May. I'm Robert Phoenix, your host, and you are you, and hopefully becoming more of you with each passing day. Because if you're not, well, you're denying the rest of us the opportunity to get to know the real you. How is everybody today? It is, I guess, from the back end of the Cardinal Cross here, and I think people are sort of brushing the ashes off of them as we've all been singed in some ways over this Cardinal Cross period in space and time, and we won't be going through this again for a while. And this last section here has been a real doozy. And the thing with these Cardinal Cross energies is that they don't end when the actual alignment is over or the planets shift and move on. The impact that they have on us stays with us, and that can be said for almost any major transit in the astrological chart and in the life of the individual. But this one, a Cardinal Cross to remember. I'm still in a heap of pain in my left foot when I smashed my toe cleaning my old apartment. It's almost 2 weeks later, and my left toe, my left foot is giving me the appearance of having a club foot when I walk. I had other things come up during that Cardinal Cross, but the left foot has stayed with me. So welcome to the show today. You know, I like to have a mix of information and stimulation on the show. Sometimes I like to bring on somebody who will blow your mind and shock your world, something like Dane Wigington, and we'll get into chemtrails. Last week I had Dave Parker on, and we talked about free energy, the free energy party, and the ability to take our own lives back on any number of levels, not just with free energy, but with organic foods and biodiversity and biodynamic farming and alternative source of energy, or reclaiming the wilds. These are all important aspects and facets of what we talked about last week. So sometimes we're here to break it down, other times we're here to shake it up, and other times we're here to build it up. And today is one of the build you up days. I'm really pleased to have June O'Brien, who is an author and has become a new friend. And she has written a wonderful series of books called the Blue Child series. And one of the most important things, one of the most important assets that we have is our imagination. Because once we let go of our imagination, once we let go of our creativity, our innovation, our ability to be novel, then we become slaves. That's right. We become slaves. We become slaves to a system that puts us in shackles, the mind-forged manacles, as William Blake once called them. And so the imagination is one of the most important pieces that we can hold on to. So we're going to get into the imagination today with June O'Brien, who's an author. We'll talk about the creative process. I'm always fascinated to talk with writers about their creative process. I've got a new post up on the website for all you Mad Men freaks. It's on the latest episode of Mad Men called The Monolith, and it has lots of layers. The episode has a lot of layers. There's Kubrick in there. There's a little bit of Charlie Manson in there. There's maybe some Jay Widener in there, and a whole lot more. So if you haven't been to my website lately, go there, check it out. I also had another post about the Pisces midheaven. And today, what did I do? I did a reading for somebody who has Cancer on the ascendant. Canaries in the coal mine, that's what cancers are, and cancers on the ascendant are. So those are two new posts over at robertphoenix.com. And, I have a new episode busting out on GaiaM today. My episodes are winding down. I think I've got one on Mars and Venus. Next week it's on the astrology of the atomic bomb, and then I have one last show about the most important and essential elements of astrology called Astrology and You, and that will probably round off my circuit over at GaiaM. It's been great. I've loved it. I've done 23 shows. I will have done 23 shows in total, and more to come, but on the independent tip. So let's just keep our focus forward. All right, I think this is June. I think she's called in here, so let's open the lines and let's see if this is our friend, the author of the Blue Child series, June O'Brien. Hello, June.
Good morning. It is.
Welcome
to
the
Good morning,
show.
Robert. How are you?
I'm good. My baseball team won last night.
Oh.
And not only did they win, but they showed a real degree of heart in teamwork in order to win, because we were down going into our last inning. And we were down by 3 runs, and we came back. We scored a bunch of runs, and we kept the other team from scoring in the last inning. And so we won. But I'll tell you, the coolest part of last night, maybe you might have some experience around this, but the coolest part of last night was I got to the game, and I was a little late because I had to pick up another child on the team, and he lived a long ways away. So we got there. They're taking batting practice. I get them on the field, and this team looks lethargic. I don't know what's going on with them, but they don't look good. We did infield, and they stunk. So we called them over, and I'm learning now as a coach to do certain things, right? So I pulled them away from the parents because I didn't want the parents to hear what I was going to say. Not because I was going to say anything controversial, but I didn't want to give them a chance to interpret it as being controversial. So I pulled them all the way down to the right field line, and I basically said, "You guys stink. You look terrible. I don't know what's going on there." And then I said, "We're going to have the playoffs coming up, and I don't have to play everybody. So if you want to play in the playoffs, you've got to start showing me right now that you're going to play." And so they came out, and they played well, but there were 2 moments in the game that were really interesting for me. One is I went out and I talked to my son who was pitching, and I was just going to talk to him, and then all of a sudden, everybody on the infield decided to come in and talk to us, which I wasn't planning on. And then the next thing I know, they're offering my son words of encouragement and propping him up. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. It's like, come on, Griffin, you can do it. It's like, I didn't expect that at all. I thought it was just going to be me and him, but hey, we had a team moment. It was great. So then I came back out later, a couple innings later, and we were starting to fall apart. And I called them all in, everybody, the outfield, everything. And I said, look, we've been here before. This is where we lose games. I said, there's a domino effect. And all of a sudden, We make one mistake after the other, and we can't have that. Do you guys want to win? You want to win? They said, yes, 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 So after that, they pulled it together. We got out. We won the game. So it was a victory on many levels. And who knows, maybe it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But last night, we did all the right things, and I'm happy for that. So there you go. There's my story.
Oh, that's remarkable. It's so wonderful when that magic happens, when what you're trying to do actually penetrates the group and they can work together. That's beautiful. Your son must have been so pleased.
Well, I think he was, and he's a very emotional kid, and the way he pitches very close to the strike zone, which means that sometimes he'll get calls and sometimes he won't. And when he doesn't get the calls, he gets really upset. And last night, the umpire came out. I've never seen an umpire do this. He got up and he walked out and he explained where everything was to him. So he needed that, and I thanked the umpire for that. I said, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. So anyway, the cool thing too, June, is that it was truly a team effort. And I think that one of the things that I've always loved about sports is the immediacy of our actions and our attitude in the moment. You can see it take place in real time. There are measurables. There are measurables.
A real short feedback loop.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges with life is that we don't always get to see the fruits of our efforts or the fruits of our labors until maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months down the line, or ever at all sometimes. So the beauty of sports is that it does give us a sense that things can happen and things can change. And
with really emotional people, particularly children, I think sometimes they just don't know how things work. And so when you go out and give very specific information, like, okay, here's the strike zone, okay, this is how this works, okay, this is what I'm doing, it's very helpful to really emotional people, because I think some of us run around the universe not knowing how anything works.
Well,
in a practical way.
Yeah, I think that the way the game is sort of being played at one level, we think we know how it works for a while, and all of a sudden the rules change. Right?
That's right.
So
reality will do that. You figure it out, and then it'll fall apart on you.
That's right. Our point of reference completely shifts. Well, let's talk about you. Yeah. Let's shift our point of reference here. You are the author of the Blue Child series. I just want to read this. This is from your website. It says, the Blue Child series is the spiritual adventure of 3 sisters, medicine men and women, spirit people who move between the dimensions, the keepers of the Old North Road. All of these are called to save the medicine from the Lilin, a group who control the governments and resources of the world. Central to success is the Blue Child, a little girl sent from the heavens to help their efforts. But the child is not what the elders expected. Instead of ending the threat, she precipitates a new crisis. I'm going to read the intro for the Blue Child series On the Mountain. This is the synopsis for this one. If you were called by a dream by spirits who live in the mountains, would you go? Even if it meant everything would change, including who you think you are. Ruby did. As a result, she is taken on a journey by the Old Ones, creatures some people call Sasquatch. They lead her on an arduous journey with an unknown purpose, though they are clear that the need is urgent and Ruby's role essential. Ruby knows she is a door to the dream world. Now she learns that she is more. With help from her 2 sisters and the elders of 2 tribes, Ruby must learn what and who to trust. So let's start here. This is the Blue Child series. Can you tell some folks a little bit about your background? Because your background, I think, is important to understanding the type of fiction and narrative that you've decided to create with.
Well, I'm enrolled in a tribe on the East Coast, the Nansemond Tribe. But I was raised in the southeastern corner of Oklahoma. And that's where my family went while it was still Indian territory. And so I'm part of a big, extended family that lives there along the river bottoms and up in the hills. And so I was raised among people who expected to see spirits, expected to know things before they happen, to encounter multiple dimensions of reality. And so that's in the matrix of who I am. For many years, I have degrees in psychology and counseling, and for many years I worked for tribes and was a part of the local longhouse here in the Northwest, and have been attending ceremonies there for decades. And so that's kind of been my spiritual home.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and mainly I've written poetry. Most of my life I wrote poetry. And so when I got pushed into writing these novels, I was reluctant. I don't know how to write fiction. I don't know how to write novels. But the push became more emphatic. So I just sat down and began to write. And what happened was a surprise. I had no idea this is where the story was going. I work a lot with dreams over time. I was identified as a child as one of the dreamers in our family. And so these stories actually originate from a dream state. There's a certain place I go when I'm ready to go to sleep at night. There's a certain story I move into and then slide from that story into sleep. And so that went on for decades, and it began to come to me that the figures in this sort of subliminal state, or this dream state, seem to have independence and places and affinities to certain places. And so I became curious about them. And then I had a very pushy friend who kept pushing that I try it. So I put myself into that place and began to write from there. And so not only was, in the beginning, was Ruby wondering what she was doing in the mountains, I was wondering what she was doing in the mountains too.
So when you started this off, this was an accumulation of, in some ways, psychic energy and psychic imagery that had been building up over a period of time. And I would say that perhaps the pressure that you were getting maybe externally from a friend and also internally as this was building brought you to that point when you started to sit down and start writing. What was that like on the first time when you put your fingers on the keys or the pen to paper, however you put it together? What was that like, and how long did that first session last, and how long did it take you to get to the next one? Because I think that people that write or want to write, sometimes they'll have that first push because they have something building and growing, and then once they get that push out, getting back to the task at hand and writing again and again and again is not the easiest thing to do. So can you kind of characterize and summarize what it was like the first time and literally how you got back in the saddle the second time and started to do it all over again?
When I began to write, I just followed what I saw, and understanding that it was entirely experimental. And so I put myself in that place, and then I just began to record what I was seeing. And I saw right away that a lot of what I was saying are about things that you can't actually, or you aren't supposed to talk about directly in Indian country. Some of the medicines, secret places of power, the magical aspects of certain plants, these kinds of things. I saw that this was providing me a way to say those things that aren't supposed to be said, and that I was coming in at them sideways. And I didn't know how I felt about that. I didn't know if that was okay, but it was my private writing at that moment, and so I just wrote. And then I've also seen things when I've been in the woods. I've seen spirits as clearly as I see the desk in front of me. And so when these guys started showing up, that was okay. That was all right. My reality has a place for those. When the first time I got into real trouble is trying to imagine how someone else would read this. Mm-hmm. And then I started trying to figure that out. Well, how is this going to look to somebody? Are they going to understand what I'm saying? Finally, I got myself to abandon that, which was difficult. And then I learned that like a lot of authors I've learned since, if I started writing immediately when I woke up, that I could just kind of stay in that state where no criticism, no evaluation, and just write and write and write and write and write and write. And I learned not to respond to the impulse to tidy things up while I was writing, but just to let that state talk. The Lilin, my idea of the Lilin, particularly in the first book, is these guys are evil and not redeemable, but they're also somewhat magical. They have all these powers, and some of this also comes out of things I learned from clients over the years, but also things about medicine in Indian country. Mm-hmm. But then in the second book, one Madge, who is a member of the Lilin, begins to redeem herself through love. So that went down its own path. Mm-hmm. So the process for me was to stay as much as I could in that state from which the story had begun, and then bring the editing eye to that later.
Right. I would assume that it would be something similar to picking up a signal and staying as close to that signal as possible, like a radio, right, and keep dialing in to get the clearest signal possible. And that when you began to wonder about how your audience would perceive your work, then the signal became a little bit more difficult to hone in on. Would that be an apt sort of analogy?
Yes, that actually very well states that. And what I learned to do is to depend on friends of mine, non-Indian friends of mine, to read for me and tell me where they get lost. And so I learned to depend on other people to do that function for me, and then I would just stay in the signal. Mm-hmm. and it's hard work. It's like meditation. For me, I often resist meditation. I don't want to. But then when I get into the meditation, there's something very sweet about it. And writing is that way for me, or writing this material is that way for me. Writing about dreams is also that way for me. I can just, once I get in the state, then I just write and write and write.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I think would be a challenge in some ways is that, indigenous time and native narrative and indigenous narrative are very different than Western time and Western narrative. And combining these two, realities in some ways could be tricky, because, here, for the most part, we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a catharsis. We have all these, signatures that are part of and techniques that are part of that tradition. But you're dealing with also the influences from another tradition, which is very nonlinear in some ways. Did you ever find that to be a challenge when you were working through your material?
I did at times, and I had to go back and rewrite a lot depending on the feedback that I got, after I had written everything, so that people understood where they were, which reality they were in, what time they were in, when ghosts were speaking, when communication was at a distance, all of these levels of time and dimension and ancestors that I bring into the books. And I have to say, though, that the person who really pulled this off that I so admire is Leslie Marmon Silko in her book Ceremony. They describe her as the first American Indian writer who wrote from an oral tradition. And I kept thinking of her as I was doing this, just let the writing happen, just speak it to the page and make sense of the whole thing, or edit later for the reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there were also ideas that came up in the writing, like the idea of the failed apprentice and the false apprentice, and some of these ideas that were interesting to me, and I didn't know what I thought about them until I would find myself writing, and I thought, yes, that's the way that is. That's the way that works. And in some ways, I feel about writing, or at least some writing, that things need to be said. There are certain realities that need to be said, and then anybody who needs to read those books will find them.
Right.
But there is a certain power that comes into life, into this ordinary life that we live in, that comes to Earth in that way when you write about it, when the dream or those dimensions are given a voice here, that something gets anchored on the Earth.
Yeah.
Or in our daytime reality that needs to be here.
Yeah, I would agree. Tell us about Ruby. She's the protagonist of the Blue Child series. Who is she? What makes her special? And how much of you is actually in Ruby?
Well, I assumed when I started the book that Ruby was me, but she wandered off very quickly. Ruby in the book is supposed to be the eldest daughter of these three sisters, and when the book began, she's an old woman already. And but she's always been strange. She wanders off into the mountains, and her family is very concerned that she might not always come back. So there are certain ways that they try to anchor her in the home. But as Ruby travels into the mountains, her identity begins to unravel. And particularly when she's in the cave of the Blue Child, in those scenes, she begins to realize that she is not a daughter of that family at all. And so there's this crisis when she realizes that the people she loves aren't her family.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until and so she just shelves all that because, there's crisis after crisis, and she realizes that and shelves it. And it isn't until toward the end of the second book that she begins to figure out who she was, and that her family always knew that her grandmother had found her in a meadow on the mountain as a baby, and the old ones were in the trees beyond, and that, in fact, Ruby is an old one.
Hmm. Interesting.
What has been...
There's also a mythology amongst local tribes that there are certain families that are descended from the old ones, or they are mixed old ones and human, that they have that in their bloodline.
What would be the definition of old ones? What are we talking about here? Are they spirits? Are they spirits incarnate?
Well, they're spirits that move between the dimensions, and that sometimes you will see them when you're in the forest as Robert, have you ever been in the woods and you just kind of see this sprinkling sparks, sparks that are gathered in a particular area, and you look and you go, oh, what was that?
Well, I was in the Olympic rainforest one time, and I saw some pretty incredible things in that forest, including beings that I could only consider nature beings on some level. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the old ones will sometimes have an animal form, and that's what most people are familiar with. And they, the old ones will often take an image from your mind, and they don't intend to be seen. But if an accident happens, they will often take an image from your mind, and that's who they present themselves as. But they also have the ability to erase memory. So most people, even who see them, don't remember seeing them. And they can also appear as kind of like a gathering of light. Mm-hmm. And again, most people will go, oh, what's that? Oh, I guess it was nothing. Those are the old ones. You can feel them, though. I also have seen creatures in the woods, and you can feel when you're in their territory, the old ones. And there's, that's time to pause and see if you need to back out and go home or not. And they have places where they like to fish. A lot of the local hunters won't hunt in some areas because those are the places that belong to those people, the old ones.
Well, speaking of, I was going to ask you about the Sasquatch.
and beings hanging out in the woods, and they're characters in your work as well.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about them and sort of the traditional, image of them, and how the Native people, feel about Sasquatch and how they manifest in the book?
Well, I've stayed pretty close to, in describing them in the books, I've stayed pretty close to how people see them, tribal people, local tribal people. And they hold, so they are not only traveling between the dimensions, but they hold other dimensions in place. For instance, one of the reasons the Olympic Peninsula is so powerful is they help hold a dimension there open that is, you could say, to the heavens, and that they are an entry point for other things. And they have their warrior power, but they're also healers. So they have all of these possibilities. There are places where if you feel them or you see them or you go to the woods and you get a gift that you believe is associated with them, then it's a good thing to let them know that you know how to behave, so to speak. And you can take berries and salmon or other gifts and leave them in those places to let them know that, to acknowledge the gift and to participate in that dimension from this one into that dimension. So they really aren't that aggressive. They can be if someone comes in and does something egregious, but for the most part, they have their own business. They have their own spiritual business. And it's said that the places where their children are is where people can get in really big trouble if you stumble into an area where they keep their children. Then you might experience them in their ferocity. But they aren't the only creatures out there. There are all of these things that most people dismiss. You see something and your mind dismisses it so fast that sometimes you don't even know you saw it. And that's one of the things, of course, that we do with children is we teach them very quickly what to see and what not to see.
Right.
And so we start pruning their reality. But if you're able to retrieve that or you're able to hang on to that, then you can see these things and interact with them. But as I say in the books, you need to be wise. I think a lot of people who are interested in these things believe that everything out there is benign. One of the things that we're taught in Indian country is that is not true.
What is the difference between a Sasquatch and a Manitou?
I'm not sure that there is anything other than bloodlines attached to place, and that, like the races of humans on the earth, they have different characteristics in the way they look and in the particular strengths and gifts that they have, and they serve the earth and other dimensions in different ways depending on where they are.
Right. Right. Interesting. What I would love, June, is I would love for you to read a paragraph or two from one of the books, and you're probably not prepared to do that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to play a piece of music and give you, a couple minutes to find something and read to us. Would you be open to that?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. Let me play a piece of music, and if you want to get up and get some coffee or water or tea or use the restroom, go ahead and do that. And when we come back, June is going to read a little to us from one of the books in the Blue Child series. So to get us in the mood, I'm going to play some shamanically influenced music from Jorge Reyes, and he's from Mexico. And his tradition is working with the Huichol Indians. So this is El Sendero by Jorge Reyes. And when we come back, June O'Brien will be sharing with us a passage from the Blue Child series. That was the late, great Jorge Reyes, a good friend, and El Sendero, setting the tone for June O'Brien to do a little reading to us. So get your blanket and your pillow and gather around, and just like we did in grammar school, and hang out, and let's listen to a passage here from the Blue Child series with June.
That was beautiful music.
He was great.
Awesome. So I'm going to read from the North Road, and we are with Charlie. Charlie is a medicine man who is a hereditary traditional man who is responsible for keeping the medicine safe. It's medicine that was put away. This is actually based on something I was taught. The medicine was put away when the invasion of the Americas occurred, so that it wouldn't be captured, and also so that the tribal people wouldn't use the medicine in hate, which would corrupt everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is Charlie is an old man, and he has been the keeper of the medicine for a long time. But the Lilin have discovered it. They have discovered that it exists, and so they are after it.
Okay.
The old man moves to the stove. In a battered and blackened old pot, he heats water. From a sack, he takes a few green berries, crushes them with a pestle in a small stone bowl, releases the pungent scent. He is making tea to strengthen his spirit, to disperse hesitation, to make a nest for the spirit, hide it from the predator. Charlie knows the medicine is bigger than he is, bigger than his questions. Charlie feels the scaly slither of his old friend in response. Though the silver snake has served many medicine people over the generations, he and Charlie have a powerful bond. In short, the snake loves Charlie. Charlie is so like the old people from long ago, the ones who initially gave themselves and their children, obligated their children's children to save the earth. Yes, the last of these would be Charlie, and his medicine would miss him. Charlie finishes his tea and moves to the boxes beneath the window. In them are objects no one who is not initiated should touch. With regret, Charlie lifts the boxes, some of cardboard, a few of cedar, one an old apple crate, and places them near the hearth. He hesitates. Is it too soon to know for sure that this is necessary? But Charlie may have waited too long. There may not be time enough now to finish with the contents of the boxes. The light through the window, so uniformly white, has changed, darkened, and not by the storm. Still, Charlie waits. These things, these old things, are each an instrument of ceremony to call a helper. Once destroyed, they can never be created again. Charlie fingers a dull black stone, heavy for its size and round, said to come from a hillside in the east. A stone as conscious as Charlie, as any human. When it burns, Charlie wonders, will something stir in the east where it came from? There are small round balls in Central America similar to this one, though not of the same color. Charlie has seen only one of them. It is golden, amber, smooth, and in its depths are many worlds where one can become lost. Will the golden orb and the other relatives to the black stone answer when it burns? Charlie decides to burn it last. So shall I read another one?
Yeah, read one more. That was great.
Okay. Let me see where we are. I feel so fortunate to have been taught medicine from all these places. Okay, where are we? We are in the third sanctuary, and it is at the third sanctuary, which is a place open between earth and the sky and the heavens. It's multidimensional. And it is at the third sanctuary that we find the false apprentice. Then the real horror of what has happened sinks in. What good is it to get to the fourth sanctuary, to get home, if the snake is gone? And will it be easier for the people who sought it to take it from Leon, the false apprentice? Agnes and her sisters have failed the cobalt woman, Charlie, the generations. But as Agnes' spirit sinks, something stirs under her skin, in her bones and blood. She takes a deep breath. If she did not have the child, she'd make short work of Leon. Let's go talk to Rachel, Agnes says to Blue. Blue, no longer upset, pats Agnes' flushed cheek. Rachel, her shawls in a pile beside her rocker, is building a fire. Now that he is gone, my granddaughter will be able to get through the roads. Agnes takes the branches from Rachel's hands, stacks them, and lights a match. Why couldn't she come before? Agnes asks. He blocked her. The only reason you made it is because he wanted you to. He is evil. He turned his coyote power in the wrong direction. Rachel doesn't mince words. Is there anything you can do to help Ruby? Agnes asks. I can work to clear the confusion from this place so that help can come. From under the windowsill, Rachel pulls a board loose from the wall. Behind it is an opening. From there, Rachel pulls a bag. He found everything but this. The trouble started when people learned that I am dying. It won't be long now. Agnes is surprised. The woman doesn't look sick. My granddaughter is the one I trained, but Leon learned bad work from someone else. While she was away, he came. He thought he could make me die faster. He was afraid to kill me, but not afraid to freeze or starve me. Blue pipes up. Agnes, we need grandfather's drum. Agnes goes back outside. The night is very cold. Agnes looks into the trees. She is the strong-bodied one. She feels sure she could catch Leon and defeat him in a fight if need be. Why did her frail sister have to be the one to go when Agnes longs to act? Instead, she collects the drum and a lantern. But the darkness in the cabin defeats the feeble glow of the light. Agnes puts the drum on Ruby's chair. Rachel has taken objects from her bag and placed them on the table. Sing, I will work with these. When my granddaughter gets here, we can build some real power, but in the meantime, we will do what we can. Agnes picks up the drum. Ready, it quivers in her hands. With Blue beside her, Agnes gathers her spirit and begins. The old drum radiates its low voice, vibrating the windows, penetrating the walls, climbing, searching. The old man, grandfather, is here. His children need his help, and he has come.
Wow. Good stuff, June. Really wonderful. Thank you for reading both of those passages and reading with such feeling. What would you say the demographic for these books would be? I mean, obviously the protagonist is old, but she looks back in her life and she's younger through the majority of the books. Is this a book for teens, for adults? Is it for people that are interested in native wisdom and fiction? Where do you fall in any of those categories?
The people who report really enjoying the books are, of course, Indian people, but also people who are interested in medicine and dimensions and how this works and how to interact with that. There's another group that is interested come at it more from the interest about those groups that rule the earth, which kind of surprised me, actually, that they might be interested. But it's written so that adolescents would enjoy it, that it's an adventure with snake powers and evil beings and that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, personally, I would love to see these made into a movie, only if for the sole reason to oppose these dystopian types of movies that are being made, such as The Hunger Games and Divergence, which are interesting in their own right, but quite dark. And even in the Hunger Games, where they are supposedly out in nature, they're not. They're really in a holographically shaped environment. And your stories have a very strong and profound connection to nature. I would love to see these being made into a movie. Do you have a third one that's planned for this series?
Yes, I've started work on that. I think I'm going to finish the dream book and then throw myself into that third book. The ideas that are coming, I'm having the same reaction to the third book that I had to the first, like, oh my God, I don't know if I can write that or not. I don't know if I have that skill or that capacity, but I also don't seem to have much choice. But I agree that some of the movies that are about the dimensions that are out there, I won't watch them. Sometimes I will start and I will go, no, that's polluted. That, that is, as I think that there are some constructs out there that create corresponding internal construction that is not to our good.
I would agree. There was a young, hot Native American director by the name of, I think, Chris Marker at one point in time. And I don't know where he's gone or what's happened to him, but I'd love to see him get a hold of this and see what he can do with this from a cinematic level. Talk about your dream book a little bit. What's that about? And then let's tell people where we can find your material.
The books are on Amazon. They can be located there, or they can be located via my website, which is you can just get by typing in my name or the Blue Child series. The dream book, the reason I felt compelled to write the dream book is that I believe that over time, over the decades, we've come to psychologize our dreams too much. And it's part of the damping down of what human beings are and what they're intended to be. So we're taught to be suspicious of our unconscious and the material that comes up in the dream world, and to be anxious about that, and to see it as sort of accusing us of this or that. And I really believe that what I call the dream maker, for want of a better term, that the dream maker is always an ally, is always looking at our bigger selves, and is always trying to get us to do that as well. And so it's a kind of a challenge to our small concepts of who we are. It's written somewhat like a collage. I have a section that I call The Dream Maker, She Loves You. a section, and these are short sections, one on who I am, and then I do animals and star people and sections on all of these things that are meant to reverberate with the person instead of being like a dictionary or some kind of equation.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've come to know about you is that you had a whole professional track, which you are now stepping away from and devoting more time to your writing, which I think is quite interesting and hopefully inspiring for people who, and I know that you did some of this while you were in your professional world, but are continuing to do this at this stage of your own evolution and lifespan. And I think it's important for people to understand that their realities are not fixed. They're not set in amber, that you can evolve and you can grow and you can still be creative and still tap into your imagination at any point along your own personal path. So I think that what you're doing is a testament to that, and I hope that you continue to do more, and that this next stage of your own personal process becomes even richer with your contributions and your creativity, June.
Thank you so much, Robert. I enjoy your work so much. I think that I like what you said at the beginning of the show about being who you are and having your own true voice. That is so important to do, and I appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for coming on. And when you get the Dream Book up and running, we'll have you back on and we'll talk about that. And in the meantime, you take care of yourself and stay well, okay?
All right. Thank you, Robert.
All right. Thank you, June. That's
Bye-bye.
June O'Brien, the author of the Blue Child series. And you can find her and the books at thebluechildseries.com and also on Amazon. You can get them and just download them. It's a wonderful thing, the Amazon thing. Even though it's put a lot of people out of work when it comes to books, it allows us to also have people like June self-publish so you can read it directly from her. You're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'm going to play a little bit more music. And when I come back, we're going to pump up the volume a little bit, and I'll take a look at some current events, and we'll see what's happening out there in the world. So what do I want to play here? How about something that's not going to get me into too much trouble with the copyright police. Let's stay in the sort of the slightly indigenous theme and tone of things. Here is Susan Dahim with Navai, Savage Bird. This is Robert Phoenix. You're listening to the Friday FARcast.
That was the lovely and talented Susan Dahim with Navai Savage Bird, and you're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'm your host. And in the first hour, in case you did not catch it, we had June O'Brien on, author of the Blue Child series. I highly recommend you go back and listen to the podcast or revisit this on YouTube, where you can also catch these broadcasts. Good stuff from June O'Brien. So we're going to jump into some other material here and just kind of keep you abreast as to what's happening in the world. I would say that the big ticket items right now are what's going on with Benghazi. There seems to be an effort to keep the Benghazi peace open. And when you really look at what happened in Benghazi and some of the attendant interviews and or investigations, you'll find that very, very few people who were actually a part of the Benghazi experience were interviewed. For instance, nobody from the embassy was actually interviewed in any of these investigations. Not a single one. And perhaps the most important person around all of this who was not interviewed is Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton, I don't know if you remember this or not, because we live in a 24-hour news cycle, and the memory hole is just it's it's pretty shallow. But right after Benghazi happened, Hillary Clinton apparently suffered a brain aneurysm. You remember that? And then she conveniently stepped out of the White House and moved away from anything that was even related to Benghazi, let alone the Obama administration. And now she's off busy cooking up her plans for 2016. It could very well be a Clinton-Bush ticket, a runoff between the two. Imagine that. Another Bush and another Clinton in office. And who says bloodlines don't rule? Yeah, right. But anyway, the Benghazi piece is starting to heat up again. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because it's not going away. The Democrats and the progressives are being pretty aggressive in terms of taking on people that want to revisit this and get to the bottom of it. And they are claiming that there is partisan politics being played. Partisan politics is involved. I think there's probably enough meat on the bones there to impeach Obama, to be honest with you. Now, will he be impeached? I doubt it, because he is connected to extremely powerful people, very powerful people. And who are those powerful people? Well, perhaps they're not even people at all. Perhaps they are from some other dimension. And if not from some other dimension, that they have been traumatized to the point where they don't even resemble or act anything associated with being human. Here's a piece that I found on the web. It's called Psychopaths in Charge, and it's from Waking Times. The author is Julian Wash. I'm going to read this because I've been talking about psychopaths now for about 5 years, and the psychopathic culture and the psychopathic society and psychopathology as a virus. Because if you don't play by the psychopath's rules, then there's a very good chance you will be chewed up and spit out by the psychopath and the psychopathic culture that we have propped up. And I can even see this at a very basic and fundamental level with my son. Okay, my son is here in Austin, Texas. He's playing baseball. He's on 2 teams. He plays on a rec league and he plays on a select league or on a select team. And when you get into the realm of select, you begin to get into a whole different definition of language and typology. Kids begin to believe that they are special, that they're part of a special group. Now, I wanted my son to play select baseball because he could get better. They practice 3 times a week. It's a higher level of competition. So what we have here is a double-edged sword.
he gets to get better, but at the same time, he is being thrust into this, for lack of a better term, cauldron that cooks us and cooks our perception and cooks our awareness and cooks our compassion right out of us at times. It breeds competition, and sometimes it can breed excellence, but at what cost? At what price? And if we go too far in the other direction, where everybody gets a medal and nobody is rewarded for their ability to meet a challenge or rise above their condition or rise above their state or limitations, then we get the other side of this. We get Common Core, and we get a completely dumbed down society. So there's got to be a middle path between all this, and I'm trying to navigate it here. But I want to read you this piece. It's called Psychopaths in Charge. Maybe They're Not Human. This is from Waking Times. Dear humans, today I would like to return to your awareness an aspect of the human condition that condones violence under certain circumstance. To this end, we find ourselves going along with the most egregious of things, not least of which is war. Here we find not only a consensus of opinion, but an accepted truth. People kill people. That's what we do. People have been killing each other over borders, religion, ideology, politics, and resources as far back as history will take us. It's a given that we will continue in this maniacal cycle of war, truce, and temporary peace until our time on this planet is through. It's our nature, and so it is our course and therefore our destiny. Or is it? Of course, most people are good-natured, loving, and kind, but they are often unaware of some of the more sinister elements in our world. Does our slumber make us a threat to the survival of humanity? If so, can one surmise that our enemy might actually be the person we see every morning in the mirror? Are we complicit in some way by simply being oblivious? Is this what the others mean by sheeple, those who simply go along to get along and never ask probing questions? We sit around the proverbial card table and we're handed the rules. We don't really question them. The rules are the rules, and that's that. And at the end of the night, should one run out of money because the others understood the rules better, then maybe a moment of truth will beckon. Perhaps one will decide it is best not to bother with the rules at all and instead seek to unmask the rule maker. We live in a culture of political correctness where people are likely to become more offended by an off-color remark or a waving middle finger than by a war. Like with most templates of social order, political correctness is just another illusion, a construct we've bought into. It's there to give the impression that society cares. Society does not care. We are told warm and fuzzy things to make us believe we live in a benevolent culture. We do not. We live in a war culture. We live in a prison culture, and we live in a culture of denial. Don't believe it? Like I said, denial. At 17, a child still needs a note from their mother to be excused from a day at school. Well, that's kind of innocent, warm, and fuzzy. 6 months later, they might just shove a rifle into his arms, march him to the front lines, and order him to kill. And when that particular son or daughter doesn't return home, they say freedom is not free, and that your child paid the ultimate price for the wonderful life we so enjoy today. The wonderful life minus this beautiful child that is. Give me a break. I cannot stand the Orwellian doublespeak and propaganda, the hypocrisy that spews from the orifice of the rule maker. In a war culture, you go to war on everything. We have the so-called war on terror, which theoretically cannot be beat. It is impossible to end the war with an enemy that is not defined by a border. And so this war will continue not only on foreign soils, but right here in the good old land of the free. The latest buzz is all about domestic terrorism. See something, say something. Well, I'm seeing something, and I'm sure trying my best to say something. We love that word war. We must. We have gone to war on drugs and on poverty, war on hunger and obesity. Of course, let's not forget those wars fought with battle armor and guns. We just want to do war on everything, don't we? And it's sort of strange, really. You see, it's not just a U.S. thing or a Russian thing. It's not just the powder keg we call North Korea or the spiraling tension between Japan and China. We're all into this war thing. There are considerable agreements made behind the scenes. There's complicity and cooperation on a level that is mind-boggling to the newly awakened. Let's face it, often there is a lot of money to be made on both sides of the war equation. The opium trade in Afghanistan is just one example. Business has never been better or more lucrative since the U.S. loaned its assistance. War is good business for the handful that actually benefit from it. But at what cost? An online dictionary source defines psychopath as a person with a psychopathic personality which manifests as amoral and antisocial behavior, lack of ability to love or establish meaningful personal relationships, extreme egocentricity, failure to learn from experience, etc., etc., etc. Also called sociopath, a person afflicted with a personality disorder characterized by a tendency to commit antisocial and sometimes violent acts and a failure to feel guilt for such acts. That pretty much sums up who's running our world. Are they entirely human? To be honest, I'm not so certain. I have difficulty defining the human species without considering our remarkable propensity to love and be loved. But there are those that do not love or care for others, and one must wonder just what planet they're from. Perhaps we can generalize and simply call some people psychopathic. They might as well be lizards in skin suits as far as I'm concerned. To call them human seems a stretch indeed, but they walk the walk and talk the talk. We get tricked by these tricksters. They're good at their game, and they know it. They've had plenty of time to really get it all honed down good and tight. Back in the 1960s, the so-called counterculture, or hippie generation, emerged onto the scene. Many began to question whether what they were told about the JFK and Dr. King assassinations was true. The Vietnam War only served to galvanize this awakening. Back in those days, news outside the mainstream channels came mainly through relatively obscure articles, books, and by word of mouth. The energy of this movement was captured in a big way, however, through the music of that era. We don't have Janis Joplin anymore, but we do have the internet, and this has greatly contributed to a mass awakening and the unstoppable momentum of the truth movement. People who run the world do not necessarily have any allegiance to any particular country or party, yet they make decisions based on their one world governmental view that affects you and me on a daily basis. Where do they get their power? Well, ultimately, their power comes from their ability to manage all of us. And where are the clergy? Why have they not been calling for an end to all the rampant bloodshed in these trying times? That's right, they're not allowed to discuss politics. It violates their 501c3 pact with the government. That's another way of saying they're taking hush money. Don't talk about war and politics and get a nice little break from the tax man. This gig is rigged. Say one thing and do another. That's the name of the game. They'll preach platitudes of love and peace, but they'll never preach the horrors of war and bring the message to the street. In 1988, director John Carpenter released a film called They Live. It follows a drifter referred to as Nada, who discovers that the so-called ruling classes were in fact malevolent entities masquerading as human. They manipulate people into spending money, breeding and accepting the status quo, even though the constant bombardment of subliminal messages via mass media, Some might feel this was more of a documentary than a sci-fi thriller. The film is famously remembered for its 5.5-minute alley fight between the actor that was able to see these entities, Roddy Piper, and the actor that would not see, Keith David, because he wasn't willing to put on the special glasses that permitted this ability. Carpenter drags the brutal fight scene out for an almost comical duration. After watching the scene, I realized he was really trying to convey the frustration and difficulty involved in trying to wake up a fellow human. Just put on the damn glasses and take a look. No, won't do it. A musician friend of mine whose band saw considerable success in the late 1960s always ends his conversations by saying, keep it real. Keep it real? Well, that's what I try to do. But it just isn't just always that easy. There are unseen forces at work trying desperately to keep us apart and in the dark. The tension building in Russia is yet another chapter waiting to explode. It might even be the final one. Never has there been a more urgent time for the human race to start behaving as humans again. We need to pull the rubber masks off those who claim to be serving us and realize that they would rather serve us with a sprig of parsley and mashed potatoes on the side. Are these people human? Those who feed off of war and profit from death and destruction seem to fit rather nicely in that shape-shifting lizard category, I'd say. So who are they? What are they? That's a question I continue to debate. On the plus side, this awakening movement keeps getting stronger by the day. I'm optimistic that despite some of the more grim forecasts out there, we still have a pretty decent chance of turning our situation around. It only takes a motivated 3% of any population to affect major changes in policy and direction. I think we're nearly there. Until next time. So that's from Waking Times, Julian Wash, contributor. It's a good piece. The writer, author, touches on a number of really key points. I think the most key point is what he says right there at the bottom. He says it only takes 3%. It only takes 3%. I'm going to say something really controversial right now. That the Jewish population makes up 2% of our entire population here in the United States. And if you look across the board, they are deeply engaged in politics, in the media, and in banking. I'm not saying anything that is a lie. I'm not saying anything out of character. If it was another group of people, I would quote that statistic. So what I'm trying to share with you is that 2% of the people have made a distinct change and difference in how we relate, how we see, how we purchase, how we buy, how we barter, how we trade, how we exchange information. All right? It is clear. I'm just using it as a statistic. That's all I'm using it for. I'm not singling anybody out. I'm just sharing with you a statistical fact. And the author says it's 3%. Okay? 3%. That's all we need. Now, what does it take? What does it take for 3% to put the glasses on and see where things are going? Well, one of the things that it will take is an undeniable series of events where people will stand back and look at in awe by what's taking place. And they will have no choice. They will have no choice but to see what's really going on. And we're starting to see some of those things emerge. It's happening. And it's been happening. If you can look around and notice. You know, I was taken to task on my Facebook page because I was talking about Donald Sterling. Okay, I was taken to task by somebody who said that I was being manipulated by the media, which is a bunch of horseshit. Okay, the reason why I found the Donald Sterling piece interesting and still do is because it is very rare that we see somebody like Sterling who has gobs of money and power. He owns more land, more homes in Beverly Hills than anyone. And yet he was taken down. He was literally taken down by his girlfriend who baited him, recorded his conversations. She was an obvious plant, a Mata Hari. Why was he singled out? Why was he fingered by not only potentially his other rich brethren of the NBA, other rich brethren that were part of his socioeconomic network? Why? This does not happen very often. And as a result, what we've seen is we've seen some incredibly telling things. And the details are still emerging. We've seen racial attitudes. We've seen how people are viewed, certain races and certain classes are viewed abroad. These are really interesting, compelling bits and pieces of information that we don't often get. And Donald Sterling coughed them up. Miss Stiviano, who goes by about 4 different names, by the way, helped coax these things out of him. Now, there's a rumor that the people that were behind what happened with Donald Sterling are the Rothschild and the Guggenheim family. Very wealthy families. Why? Because they want the Los Angeles Clippers. They want that team. And they want their guy, Magic Johnson, who is their guy as the front man of the LA Dodgers. They want him to be the front man for the LA Clippers. Of course, Magic is synonymous with Los Angeles. And who was connected to V. Stiviano? Who was taking the selfie with V. Stiviano as he walked into the Staples Arena in LA? Magic Johnson. He's the guy. So what we're seeing here is this internecine sort of gang warfare between 2 wealthy families or 3 wealthy families in a very wealthy faction. All right, it's fascinating stuff, but also quite revealing at the same time. Now, there are other slightly bizarre and yet very interesting angles to this. V. Stiviano, right on the heels of what she's just done, which was basically bait another human. That's what she did. She got on the phone and she kept returning to this whole discussion around race so that Donald Sterling, who's 80 years old, could exasperatedly, and I'm not taking Sterling off the hook, but this is what happened, exasperatedly share his views and opinions, which are shared and held by others, by the way, and he talks about this. And what is her payback? What is her payoff? She's getting 2 kids. She's getting 2 kids that she gets to adopt through the LA foster child or adoption agency. That woman is now going to be in charge of 2 children. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of her, because of course they've got the paparazzi and TMZ and everybody else is hanging out in front of her house. And she's walking around now with this visor that looks like it's something right out of Judge Dredd. So she's wearing like her, quasi lingerie, bling bikini, leather chap kind of thing, and this visor, and walking her little dog. I mean, the whole thing is completely bizarre. I mean, what the hell has happened to this country and this world? She's giving interviews with this Judge Dredd visor over her face, and now she's getting 2 kids. God help those kids. Because we know what happens to these kids. They get turned out. That's her reward. And who knows what her background is. I've tried to find information on her. I can't find anything. And I've searched all those names. I can't find a single name associated with her that has any kind of personal history. Who knows where she came from? Who knows what her background is? You don't see anything on the news like, hey, I knew V. Stiviano when I was in high school, and she was a chatterbox, or she liked to catch people in lies, or she was manipulative, or she was just the cutest thing, and she was a cheerleader. Nothing. So nobody says that they know her. So who knows who she is? Anyway, what I'm trying to share with you is that the psychopaths are starting to announce themselves. We're seeing what's happening. We're seeing what's taking place. We're beginning to peek behind the veil. And one of these days, that veil is going to rip wide open. I'm telling you, it's coming. It's going to rip wide open. And your jaw is going to drop. And when it drops, you're not going to have very long to make a decision about what you want to do, personally and collectively. The little you and the big you, the little I and the big I, the we, the I that is we. We're not going to have much time. But there is a shock moment coming. Trust me, it's on the way. And it will be very shocking. And it might just even have the power to flip the script in such a way that we can begin to turn the tide in this momentum. Look, these people are here for a reason. Whatever they are, wherever they're from, this intergalactic, parasitic, multidimensional life form, they're here for a reason. They're here to wake us up. That's it. That is their role. Okay? They're like mosquitoes. There's this funny thing going around the internet. It's Confucius say that when a mosquito lands on your balls, it's a really good time to practice nonviolence, right? I mean, the mosquito is a metaphor because you are aware of the mosquito, right? And you want to stamp it out, or you want to get it out of the house, or whatever. So this is what their role is. They're here to wake us up. And when we become awake, we must then define ourselves against that. And you have to ask yourself, am I that? Or when do I perpetuate the same kinds of behaviors that I justify, which relates me to that? That is the big challenge. That is the huge challenge, because then we have to take responsibility on a moment-to-moment basis for our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And that, my friends, is not easy, trust me. It is so easy to slip and slide and justify and rationalize and backslide. At the end of the day, we have to live with ourselves. And maybe at the end of a lifetime. I'll share with you a story, a couple stories. First story, I'm coaching this baseball team, and I'm doing the best I can, right? I volunteer my time. I love these kids. I enjoy baseball, and I really get off on watching them play well and improve and do all those things. A couple weeks ago, I'm talking to some moms on the team, and all of a sudden, I'm getting this sense that parents don't like what I do. Oh, yeah, you should talk to some of the parents. And this is coming from my team mom, not my team mom, I apologize, my dugout mom, who theoretically should be my ally. She's in the dugouts, right? She's part of what we're doing. If you don't like what I'm doing, then get out of the dugouts. I don't need your sand anchor on my experience. But anyway, so I get the feeling that there's a mutiny on the bounty. And I'm just trying to coach a baseball team. So I decide before our next game to call a team meeting with parents. Like, hey, let's all meet before the game, because I don't want this to fester on and boil over to the next game and the next game and the next game. If you got a problem, tell me. Then again, I'm a man, and this is kind of how men deal with things sometimes. Let's get it out, talk about it, get it out in the open. I mean, I could have said, screw you. Maybe that's another, tactic. But I decided to get it out in the open. There were two people who did not like what I did or what I was doing, and their rationale for it was completely irrational as far as I'm concerned. I swore twice. I said, what the hell are you doing, to my own kid? And I said shit one time when a play went wrong. Okay? Those are my sins. And then another person one of the people felt that I singled her out during this meeting. Well, the only reason I singled them out was because her and the other person, my dugout mom, were the only people that had any gripes that were there. The other people didn't have any gripes, so it's on to them, right? Anyway, I had to talk to the commissioner of the league. I had to have two conversations with the commissioner of the league. One was via phone and the other was via email. And one of the parents had a full-on face-to-face conversation with the commissioner. I don't know what they wanted. Did they want me fired? I don't know what they wanted. I don't understand. I didn't understand any of this. I just thought I was doing the best I could. So what I did ultimately is I wrote an email to the person who talked to the commissioner. And I basically said, I'm doing the best I can. I'm open to learning other things. I want to be a better person. I want to be a better coach. And this is my opportunity to do that. And I thank you for it. And I came from my heart. I don't want any malice towards this person. And I sure as hell don't want to carry a grudge. Because when we carry grudges, that is when we are our worst and our most vulnerable. That is when the psychopathic tendency The virus, it's in us all the time. It is in us all the time. And it's when we can vibrate above it, when we are conscious and aware and we act out of love, that it cannot have any kind of impact in our lives. But when we get into resentment and grudges and envy and jealousy and all these other things, it takes hold of us and it changes us. It shapes us. It shifts us. It distorts us. And then the next thing you know, we're all embodying and acting out in a psychopathic type of way. Now, it's really interesting. I'm learning so much through this whole baseball trip. My son plays on a select team, which I was talking about earlier, and there is a coach on that team, the head coach. And, he's not a bad guy. He's actually an okay guy, but he's super macho and alpha male and wants to win. We played his rec team last week, and he pitched his best pitchers against us. He really wanted to beat me. I could tell. Come on, I'm psychic. I know these things. I'm intuitive. And we lost. I didn't like to lose. I don't like the way we lost. But we lost. I don't mind losing. If we play well, we play our hardest. That's life. You show up, you do the best you can, and some days it doesn't go your way. And we did it for a few innings, then we fell apart. So then I got an email from him, and he was talking about what's happening with the select team, which is different than the rec league team. And he says, good luck to you on the playoffs unless you play the blankety blanks. And if you play the blankety blanks, for those 2 hours, you are my enemy. But afterwards, we'll shake hands and it'll all be good. And I just thought, that's a really interesting way of parsing this whole thing. You are my enemy for those 2 hours. In some ways, isn't that really what we're talking about here? That we can subdivide and we can parse out and we can compartmentalize our psychopathology. So for 2 hours, I will slit your throat. But after that, let's shake hands. I just thought, this is crazy. You were and couldn't there have been a different, and I'm not going to go there. But here's what I think is interesting. Here's what I think is really interesting. 2 days later, I went to a game where they were playing, his team, his rec team was playing another team. And there's a kid on his team who's really good, and he used an illegal bat. It was too big. And he got a big hit, and he knocked in 2 runs. Now, the guy who sent the email out, the guy who manages that team, was not there that day. He was not managing that day. So his assistant coach, who I actually like, he was managing that day. So the kid uses an illegal bat, knocks in 2 runs, is at second base. Timeout's called. Manager from the other team walks out and says to the umpire, I think he used an illegal bat. The umpire goes over, looks at the bat size. Sure enough, it's too big. The kid is off the bases. He's out of the game. The runs don't count, and he's suspended for the next game. And not only is he suspended for 2 games, but the coaches, or the head coach, is suspended for 2 games. So the guy that sent out the email about being an enemy, well, he wasn't even at his own game. And sure enough, he had an enemy. And now he's out for 2 games. He's suspended for a game. His team is playing the biggest game of the season tomorrow, and he can't manage that game. So in a weird way, we get what we put out into the world. All right, it's not that complicated. We meet ourselves. When I was started off on the esoteric path, I had a very wise and way beyond my pay grade teacher. And he said to me, each man is given according to his own beliefs. So if you're looking for an enemy, you'll find one. And he did. He's got a new enemy now, and thankfully, it's not me. All right, so I have one more story to share, and then we're going to shut it down today and move on to our weekends. So this is for the people who are connected to me on Facebook. This is the hat story. I recently put up, yesterday was Throwback Thursday on Facebook. I've never done this before, but I put up a throwback picture. I don't have many, but it was a picture of me in Chichen Itza. And I'm wearing a hat, a big white hat, and I'm standing in front of the main pyramid at Chichen Itza. And I got my picture taken. So people were asking me about the hat. And so here's the story of the hat. Before I got to Chichen Itza, I was in Mérida, which is sort of the big city down there in the Yucatan. And I'm walking around the town. This is back in 1992. And I'm walking around the town, just checking things out. And I'm staying at a youth hostel. And this guy comes up to me, and he says, Senor, how are you today? And I'm like, I'm fine. How are you doing? So he starts talking to me, and we're talking, and he finds out where I'm going to. I said, yeah, well, I'm going to go out to Chichen Itza. I'm going out to see the temples tomorrow. He said, oh, my friend, you must have a hat. You must have a hat. I have a friend here who is a hat maker, and he's the best hat maker. His hats are high quality. If you do not have a hat, you will get burned. You do not understand the sun. You are not from here. Of course, this is in October, almost November, so the sun isn't quite as intense. But hey, I'm willing to take the guy at face value, and I'm willing even to explore the possibility of having a hat. Why not? I might need a hat. So I said to him, yeah, I'm really looking forward to going there. I was also thinking about maybe going to Tulum. He says, oh, Tulum. Tulum is such a nice place. You go to Tulum and you take a pussy with you to Tulum. I'm like, what? What did this guy just say? And I'm thinking, oh, that's great. Yeah, I'll take a pussy with me to Tulum. I'll just throw it in my suitcase. I'll just throw it in my suitcase right next to the hat, so that when I get to Tulum, I can take both of them out and take advantage of them. I thought that was one of the most hilarious things I'd ever heard in my life. You take a pussy with you. Maybe you can hook me up with one of those, too, while I'm here. Anyway, I went to the hat maker, and I bought the hat. He seemed like a nice guy. The hat was a high-quality hat, so I bought it. And that's the hat story. I had a great time in Chichen Itza, by the way. It was amazing. And I have a lot of stories. My favorite story was actually watching the election of Bill Clinton while I was in Mérida. The election was happening. And I was sitting there with an old Mexican guy in a pizza parlor watching the election. And we're drinking beer, and we're eating pizza, and we kept drinking a lot of beer, and we must have said, fuck Bush, about half a dozen times over the course of the night, and toasted our glasses and laughed. Little did we know that we were getting George Bush's fifth or sixth cousin, or whoever he is. But that's a different story. All right, so I think we've done it. I think we've reached the end of the line here on today's Friday FARcast. Again, I want to thank June O'Brien for being a part of the show and her wonderful readings from the Blue Child series. And as always, I thank you for showing up and listening. And do your best to separate yourself from the psychopathic virus that is inflicting each and every one of us at every turn. It is insidious. And you always have to check yourself. Check yourself to test yourself. That's what I'm talking about. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Go check out my last episodes over at Gaiam TV. We'll be starting up something new and fresh over here on my new website, which is coming. My new website is coming as soon as Mars goes direct. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Here's Philip K. Dick. I'll see you next Friday, hopefully with the Via Venefica. We'll talk about the magical, mystical, wonderful world of symbolism. This is Robert Phoenix. Have a good weekend.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality And the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.